I'm going to be talking tonight about gardening with natives in the naturalistic style. I will be concentrating on perennials and grasses. At the end, there is a list of grasses, and we will go through most of those, and also a list of perennials. Each one of the slides will have the name of the perennial and the basic information that you need to make up your mind whether you want to use that plant or not. And before I start, I am going to present to you the information that we are required for you to show so that you know about it. I am representing the Master Gardeners at 21st and Ridge Road, and we have a hotline. We try to help you with your garden problems, so bring them to us. In that same building, we are able to help you in other areas of life: aging and Medicare, food and nutrition, agriculture, 4-H, etc. We are an equal opportunity provider and employer, and we work under the auspices and the aegis of K-State, as well as Sedgwick County. Now, let's get to the meat of the presentation. Before we start, I'm going to do a quick review of some terms because there's always a question about what is a native plant, what is a nativar. Also, when we go to the nurseries to buy, we ought to know what we are buying and why we are buying them. I just naturally like to talk about genus and species, and also I will use the common name. But when you're buying something, you better make sure that you know that what you are buying. So let's talk about a native plant. I did a lot of research in the last 2 years about this. The Agricultural Department, USDA, the Forest Service, a lot of botany books, etc. And these are the 3 major ideas that I came up with. A native plant is a plant that grows in an area prior to European settlement. So it was here. To me, there's always a question about that. Are we talking 1942? Are we talking about when the Vikings came to America up there in the north? What are we talking about? There's always a question about that. So the one that I like the most actually is the one that says occurs in an area, ecosystem, or habitat without direct or indirect human introduction or intervention. Or the other one is the result of local natural evolution. These are 3 ideas that are usually talked about when a native plant definition is looked for. The question is, why do we use natives? I think that the main reason is because we ourselves have changed in the last 50 years or so. We are proud of where we live or of the heritage of our place. We like to save water, and we like to use plants that have adapted to the local environment, which means that they have adapted to the flora and the fauna around them. And the word community comes up. And this is how most people that are writing about naturalistic gardening, or the term might be matrix gardening, prairie gardening, native gardening, they use the word community. Plants like to make friends with other plants. Now, one of the major things that comes up whenever we talk about native plants is the root systems. And that is tremendously important. It helps us because they absorb a lot of water. They go underground rather deeply, our native plants' roots do, and they find water during droughts. But no matter how deep they go, most of the daily absorption of water is in the first 4 feet or so. It helps us improve our soils, which is very important. They add organic matter deep down, greater than 10 feet. And so they increase carbon sequestration, which will help us with our climate. It improves filtration, which is important because if we have a drought and all of a sudden we have a fantastic downpour, we don't want to have what happened in California happened a lot here. For example, what happened there was that most of the water that fell did not go into the ground at first. It went directly into rivers and into the ocean because there were not enough deep roots and the soil was compacted. Now, there are shallower roots in a lot of our native plants, but they also do the same, whether they are in the woodlands, in savannas, or wetlands. And this is a very, very important diagram, because if you don't learn anything today, learn one thing here. These are our grasses. This is what we have done to the front of our houses. Fescue, bluegrass, whatever, 2 to 3 inches deep. They're not doing very much for our soil. Most of our native plants, no matter what type of root systems they have, whether they're deep tap roots or whether they are fibrous systems, not too deep, they usually go to within a couple of feet, most of them 6 foot deep, and some of them 14 or more. And so the next word I would like to talk about is a varietal. What is a varietal? It's a plant that comes up, or we have a plant that's a varietal because a variation has occurred within a plant species. And they keep the same unique characteristics as the parents. And when the seeds germinate, they are true to the parents. And here's an example. Alsea rosea, genus and species. And when we buy it, it says Alsea rosea, variation. This is varietal, nigra. And so that's what that means. Now, a cultivar is more commonly used, and it means a cultivated variety. It is selective and cultivated by humans. It is an asexual propagation by cuttings, grafts, and tissue culture. And no matter for how many years that plant exists, that genome, those genes are not going to change because you're just doing them over and over and over. The botanical name, when you buy it, is surrounded by single quotation marks. So if you're talking about a tall summer phlox, let's say it's Phlox paniculata, genus and species. And then the cultivar is Blue Boy. It is a different print and it is within quotation marks. Now you say a nativar. And I am putting this in because there are always people who say, I only use natives. Well, if they use natives, then they cannot use nativars. But many of us use nativars, and that is parallel to cultivar. It is also selective and cultivated by humans. It is derived from native parents, however. It is bred for a particular trait, just like the cultivars are. Some of them may be sterile, and they are propagated asexually by cuttings, grafts, and tissue cultures. Again, the same thing, the genus, the species, and single quotation marks. Now, a hybrid is a little bit different. Many of them are sterile. It is asexual reproduction and 2 different genomes. Sometimes they're the species that you're crossing, the genus that you're crossing, and very rarely the families. It can occur naturally by cross-pollination, or this is where the money is made and people become famous. Commercially, there can be cross-pollinations, and it takes years and years. And this is the one that the tag says, do not reproduce, you cannot sell it. And in this case, there is the big X. In this case, an example would be Phlox X. It means that it's a hybrid, procumbens. It results from a cross, in this case, from P. stolonifera, a creeping phlox, and P. subulata, a moss phlox. But the major thing is that this is made by a human being. So we have to pay for the brain and the time that it takes. And we cannot reproduce it. Another thing that I want you to know is that we live in the heartland, and the heartland is really Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri. We are a continental climate. We depend, and our climate depends on big air masses, cold air masses from the Arctic Ocean area, and hot masses of air from the Gulf of Mexico. We do not have the modifying effect that big, large bodies of water like oceans or lakes will have to the land around it. Now, the other thing that's very important for you to know is that the mean date first frost is October 15th, plus or minus 2 weeks. So be careful. And mean date last frost that we just went through, April 15th for us, plus or minus 2 weeks. Now, we have all seen this map. It is the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone map. And it is important because in the 50s, this actually started back in the 20s, but in the 50s, they started to make these maps, divided the whole country and Canada into 10 degrees. This shows you the lowest temperature that plant will withstand. And then about 20 plus years ago, they decided to make it a little bit more definite. And so we are in 6B. But if you're going to buy a plant, whether a native or cultivar, whatever or not, and you're going to leave it outside in a pot, buy a zone 4 or 5, because those roots are going to be affected more. But now, I don't know how many of you know about ecoregions. And this may be important if you're going to be a purist. If you decided that you're going to only use natives, then you better know about ecoregions. There are 5 ecoregions. Level 1 is very diffuse. But when you get to 3 or 4, they are more definite. And I'll explain to you in a second what we're talking about here. And the reason this was started was because a 6B plant, let's say, that is in the middle, in our Central Plains ecoregion, it's not going to produce or act the same way that a 6B plant will do in, let's say, the Middle Atlantic region, even though they're both 6B. And the reason is, why not? Why not? These are EPA maps. And you can get on the internet, and you can get on the USDA plants database and put your zip code, and they will give you a list of plants that you can use that are native for you. BONAP, get on BONAP on the internet and do the same thing. And of course, the Illinois Wildflower Group is very, very specific about their wildflowers, what you can use according to the zip code. And there is one called Wild Ones. They're very specific. They're purist about what you should be using in your area. And the local ecotype range to them is, if you're going to say that you are really a purist native grower, should be up to 50 to 100 miles. Do I do that in my garden? Of course not. I don't have the patience. I don't have the time. But these are the sites that you can go for if you are very specific. And the Wild Ones, they have YouTube programs, etc. They are very good. And if you're going to be a purist when you're going to native gardening, those are the sites that you should go into. At the nursery, when you are buying, this is what you're going to get. The common name, the genus and the species, the good old Linnaeus, USDA hardiness zone, bloom time, size, sun, and drainage. But I just told you that if this particular plant was raised from stock from the middle Atlantic or way up in the Northwest, it's not going to have the same bloom time, may not even do as well for the animals and the insects around it. So if you are really going to get into details, you're going to need ecoregions, seasonal habits, lifespan. And remember, one of the things that I want you to know is that when it says perennial, it's not forever like true love. No, no. All you need to do is to survive 2 to 3 years. Think about cornflowers, perennials, they're not perennials, 2 to 3 years. The root zone, and you'll see why this is important. How are they reproduced? What type of management does the garden need when you have that plant? And what wildlife does it support? So let's keep going now about naturalistic gardening style. Another name for this is design plant communities. Another name of this is matrix planting. This has been going on since the 40s and 50s, when some Dutch and German people and a couple of English people fell in love with our plants, our American plants. And it became prairie gardening, it became native plant gardening, and now we're talking about naturalistic gardening. Another name is matrix planting, and we'll be seeing why it's called this. Naturalistic gardening is a modern trend. It is a combination of garden plants into a stable plant community, plants that live and can live together because they have the same needs. And the needs are light, moisture, soil, pH, and the roots. And therefore, when we want to do this type of gardening, we should think about putting plants with the same needs together or pretty close needs. Also, plants that are of equal vigor or similar vigor. We don't want them to be competing for resources. And so if all your plants have roots that are about 8 feet or 4 feet, they're going to be competing for all the resources at the same level, and that's not necessary. These communities can get along because they have evolved over time, they have adapted to the environmental changes together, and because they have lived for so long, each community creates a mood. When we say woodland, we have an idea in our brains what a woodland looks like, or a jungle, or a prairie. And also, when we go to a natural area to see gardens, we know that we're going to see irregular patterns. None of the ducks are going to be in a row with little tuxedos. No, no. And some plants we're going to see are dominant, and they are repeated throughout. There is a repetition because some plants dominate over others. And usually at one time, there is a limited palette of plants. There are a lot of plants. They grow together very closely, and they are arranged very loosely. So they are in need of environmental stressors. If we make them too happy in our gardens, we're going to have problems. I can tell you this is particularly true in grasses. I had north wind, Panicum virgatum north wind, and I was so proud of it. It was like 8 feet tall, and in the prairie, it's never more than 4 feet or 3 to 4 feet because they are fighting for their needs. But when I was just feeding them along with everything else, giving them water, and one day it rained and it rained and it rained and everything just flopped. I couldn't even walk in a pathway. But one of the things about natural native gardening or naturalistic style is tight planting. There are almost no empty spaces at ground level. If you go to the prairie, you may not see tall plants and you think that there are empty spaces. But if you look down, you're going to see everything growing together. And we talk about archetypes. Grasslands, we know what a grassland looks like. woodlands and shrublands and forests. We have an idea, and we certainly know that this is us here in the prairie. This is us. Flowers at some time, at this time, were the blues, and maybe other times there'll be other types of flowers. So what we're dealing with when we're doing the naturalistic garden approach is a plant-driven approach to gardening. And Michael King, who is a big grass guy, he has written one of the big books on grasses, says, evoke the feeling of spontaneous random nature. And remember, you are not copying, you are not replicating nature. You want to be inspired by nature and decide what kind of nature you want to project. If you do naturalistic gardening, and we'll talk about the reasons why, you're going to be maximizing ecology and you're going to minimize management. You're going to let these plants do what they need to do and see if they need your help. In other words, you're not going to look and say, oh, it's the first week in May, I'm supposed to do this and this and this. No. Or this is Wednesday, 10 a.m., I'm going to water. Maybe they don't need water. You're going to learn about your plants and you're going to know them. The first thing that you're going to do when you decide to do this type of planting is you are going to accept the site of that garden that you have or that you're going to start. You're going to observe and you're going to study the light hours. And you know what? Until the last 3 years, I never really knew my light. Now I know. And I can see the errors that I made just because I didn't know that that tree would project shade over that area, even though everything else was wonderfully lit. You're going to look at the soil type that you have, the moisture and drainage patterns, and you're going to realize that throughout the seasons, these three can vary. There are seasonal changes. You also are going to have areas of microclimate, which will allow you to get away with USDA lower or higher numbers. And you're going to know about root competition. And most of all, you're going to be aware of the structures and infrastructures, whether you have them already or you plan to do it. What will some of these fences or little artifacts that you're going to build in your garden, or the new trees that you're going to put, what are those going to do to your garden? And so this is from Scott Vaught, and I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm putting little names and names of people mainly around here, and this is to give them credit if I borrow stuff from them. And this is Maxwell Reserve, and what you're seeing here is you're seeing the taller trees in the periphery, and then as further in, you're seeing the bushes and the shorter trees. And at this time, you are seeing the Asclepia tuberosa, the butterfly weed. And you're seeing that they're very irregularly placed, naturally placed, loosely. You also are seeing that the grasses are surrounding them. And guess what you're not seeing? You are not seeing little pieces of wood mulch all over, because Mother Nature does not have an industry of mulch making. But you see, there are no real free spaces. So I want you to see what I call the St. Peter's Cathedral, the Canterbury Cathedral, whatever it is of the new perennial movement, naturalism. This is Hummelo, Pete Outhoff's private garden. And you say, naturalistic? Well, he's Dutch, and the Dutch love their hedges and they clip them to death. I want you to look at this from the spring to the fall. Just observe. This is Hummelo. And I was lucky enough to be there last August. What are you seeing? You're seeing the principles of naturalism. And he started that garden back in the 60s. And this type of planting, prairie planting, came to the United States by Irma and Van Sweden. But they did only rich people's acreage. They did beautiful public gardens, but they were the ones that originally started to use the beautiful, beautiful natives in huge masses. But what you're seeing here are some principles of naturalism, using only perennials and grasses, with the trees to the side in the periphery. The trees and shrubs are at the edges. Sturdy plants that will last throughout the year, because you are planting for a year. You are planting plants that have form and structure, because form and structure in plants is as important as colors and flowers. Colors and flowers, I always think of them as like our youth, whether male or female. It comes and it goes. Is it 25 years, 10 years, 15 years? But we live to be 80, 70 plus nowadays. So we better have something else to offer besides that youthful skin and no wrinkles. The same thing with plants. And what they give us after they get done with their color and their flowers are form and structure, some elegance. Plants are arranged as nature, a little freer aesthetics, and they intermingle with different plant types, and there is no hierarchy of size. You'll be seeing this a little bit better. You keep plants throughout the winter because you accept the reality of death. It's natural to be born, it's natural to die, and plants, when they die or they are dying, get grayish, blackish, brownish, beigey, and also keep the dry seed heads, not only because they're part of that form and structure, but because the birds love them. There's nothing more beautiful than knowing that you are feeding the birds in your bird feeder, but they prefer to be on the grass, tall grasses, trying to get some food from those seed heads. And when you're gardening with nature, after a while, you say yes to compost and no to a lot of fertilizer after you have established your garden. So you are going to be planting in seemingly random and loose fashion, in waves and swath. But there has to be a legibility to the pattern of your garden. And you bring legibility by making a few pathways, by limiting and making very clean edges, and use plants that symbolize the habitat that you're trying to express. So if you are going to have a native garden, a Midwestern type native garden, it would look a little weird to have a whole bunch of elephant ears all of a sudden in the middle. In the first place, they're going to need more shade and they're going to need more water. Now, I have elephant ears that I've carried for about 20 years. Am I going to give them away? No. But I try to give them a little place where they're not too visible. But I love them because they have been good to me. So choose plants well adapted to growing conditions. And we love to say right plant for the right place. But I will be the first one to admit that I have gotten the right plant because I know it's right for me. And I have almost destroyed everything else, making that plant be in the right place by changing the pH, by doing all kinds of things to it. No, what right plant for the right place means is that you have a place and you know what that place offers. So you go looking for a plant that will live happily there. So you're going to let certain plants dominate. You're going to keep the dry seed heads throughout the winter. And this is a very, very new idea, although it's been practiced by many of us for a long time. Living mulch, green mulch. Instead of using bags of mulch, plant something. And the concept of a design plant community is entirely agnostic about where plants come from. And this is from Rainier and West. Great minds in gardening, a great book. They took all these ideas that we all knew about and they made them legible and understandable to our brain. And it is entirely agnostic, they say. And you know what agnostic means? I don't know and I don't care. So if the plant can live with your other plants, yes, you can use it. However, remember that they're not going to be providing as much for the soil, but mainly for the insects as the other plants that are from this area. I want you to look at Humelo again. This is November of 22. And I want you to look at a few things: the use of grasses and taller plants, no hierarchy of size. The reason we believe that it is not good to put tall plants is because we as human beings are afraid of being caught in between two tall things. But look at this tall plant. It's in the front, but it's transparent. So even though it's tall, it does not provide that source of fear for the human being that is walking around it. And you can also see the different heights. There's still a little bit of height in the back, but you can have tall and short together. And here is Humelo again, another area. This is what makes grasses so beautiful. Look how they play with the light, how they move with the wind, and tall and short, in and out. We don't worry about that. These are the people that I was with. I went with a group of 9, including the lady who took us around. This garden is now closed for tours of any kind. This is the lady who took us around. However, she wrote a wonderful book on gardening and is a friend of Pete Outoff, and so she could bring anybody. But look at these gorgeous, beautiful Joe Pye weeds. Look at the verbascum. Look at the burnet. I mean, they are just beautiful. And this is another one. In Holland, the public gardens are maintained by groups of volunteers. Vlinderhof, a butterfly garden. And this was designed by Outoff and in the naturalistic idea. I'm sorry about this. I expected this to happen, and we have tried. Okay, there we go. Joe Pye weed, white, boneset white. And the same thing, the cornflowers, the liatris, the grasses, the paroscias, the achilleas, up and down, different sizes, it doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, color is important. And here is the butterfly weed, the stachys there, more grasses. This, and this, I have these, I've had it for about 4 years. I was surprised to see them there. They are not native to this area. They are Aster hindai, but they are tall and beautiful. And look at the solidago. And please remember one thing, try solidagos and try a lot of asters in your garden. In the fall, when everything else is falling apart, some of those asters, especially heather asters, are wonderful, and they are a source of nectar, and they are a source of living areas for a lot of the insects. And every place you go, there is always a place where you can see the map of the garden. We don't expect any of this to be in your mind when you're making your garden. But what this says is that there is a brain, a human brain behind it. It makes it legible. There are pathways, and they are planting for color. They are planting for growth patterns. They are planting for bloom time. And that last garden that you just saw in a video, take a look here. Look at the patterns. I am putting these because of the patterns. You saw this area before. We have wonderful, wonderful Midwestern plants, and these people love them. Look at the repetition of pattern here. This is one of the ways naturalistic gardening is important, because they use repetition, just like you saw the repetition. And here it is again, a group of cornflowers and another one here, and grasses, repetition of grasses, different verticalities. Some of them are fountain types. The same thing that you saw before. Stachys, you saw this area before from another view. Almost like a quilt. And now I am going to show you some of these naturalistic gardens. This is what made Pete Autos famous, and this is what made the American gardener go crazy over this system. This is the High Line in New York. And this is number 1 or number 2 most frequented spot in New York by all the tourists. And I want to show you again, and this is the Battery Park, also by Out of in New York. I want you to see the different heights. I want you to see how tight the plantings are, but I also want you to look at this. Mother Nature is very slow coming, and when you have native plants, it's okay to have color in the spring. Natural plants, native plants, are very ephemeral, and they're very late, and you can barely see them. Many of us love to see these bright colors. We love to see the daffodils, or we love to see the hellebores. We love to see things that tell us that we are renewing, that this is the new season. And yes, here it is. Again, don't put them in line. Don't put a few. Buy a bag of 100 and just throw them around. And this is the Battery Park. This is Pete Autos designed also a meadow, and here is the design. But what you're seeing are low plants. You are not seeing high plants. The meadow in French is La Prairie, because when the French hunters and trappers came and they saw the Midwestern beautiful grasses, they had never seen anything like that. The only close thing that came to their mind was their own meadows, and meadow in French is La Prairie. And so here you go. But what you're seeing here is another way of accepting grasses and natives, just low. You don't have to use high. And this type of method of planting can be used in large areas or in small areas. And this is my most favorite garden of them all. This was the first garden in the United States by Pete Autos. And I want to show you early in the spring with all the beautiful tulips. Again, in a very loose fashion, all one color. No chocolate box sampler here. And this is the beautiful Salvia River in a very swath or wave-like pattern. That's the planting pattern, but they took about 5 different types of salvias, from very light pink to very dark red, changing the sizes and changing the blooming times so that you have all these salvias interspersed, and it expands the flowering time. Again, the repetition, repeat, because Mother Nature repeats in a natural area. And then you keep these seed heads. You keep the dry plants because you have chosen plants that have form, that have structure, that have some personality and elegance. And this is my favorite grass, Korean feather grass. But whatever it is, grasses are beautiful. And take a look where you're going to put them, because you want them to be exposed to some wind for movement, and find out how the light is going to hit them, because that's important too. And again, look at this. This is Veronicastrum, and Culver's root is the name. And Veronicastrum, there are multiple kinds, but this has finished already producing the seeds, and they have chosen to take off the seed heads, but they still have presence, because there are some perennials that become almost mush after they finish flowering. And of course, here is the Solidagos. When you buy Solidagos, Canadensis is not a good idea because it's a thug. To me, any plant is either a thug or a well-behaved social plant. And the Canadensis, the Solidago Canadensis, can be a real problem. And this is Kelly Norris, the All-American Gardening Boy. And this is, he has a beautiful YouTube programs, but he also has a wonderful book. And this is when he was working at the Greater Des Moines Garden. And here are the books that you want to know. New Naturalism by Kelly D. Norris. He took a lot of the ideas from Rainier and West in the planting in the post-wild world and made them more edible, more acceptable to the average American gardener. What planting in a post-wild world did was took a lot of the ideas that everybody knew and made them into wonderful diagrams. And I'll be showing you some. This one, Roy Diblick, he's a plantsman, and he has a wonderful nursery in Wisconsin, Northwind Nursery. So you know how he became famous, Northwind grass. But in any case, this is a great book. Explanations are simple. He knows his plants. He's a humble, helpful person. The no maintenance perennial garden. Anything with Pete Outof's name is wonderful. Prairie Up is a recent book. It's simple. It's an introduction to natural garden design. Take a look at it. This is a wonderful book, Native Plant Gardening for Beginners, because it answers very basic questions. And this one is a good overall source, Native Alternatives to Invasive Plants. And this is why you need to know what you really want to buy, genus and species, because they can look alike and they are not very good. Anything with Neil Kingsbury, wonderful man. I took a trip with him to see Spanish gardens, naturalistic gardens. He really knows his stuff. He's very basic, and he has a lot of books out. I put this one in, The Wild Garden, because he started it all. William Robinson in the 1890s was the first one to put out a wonderful magazine that came out every month. The first magazine in gardening that came out every month. And also he was an Irishman who taught the English how to plant and do gardening. And he was the first one to believe that there was a possibility of wild in the English garden. And of course, we would not be talking about nature without all the wonderful work that Tallamy has done, these two books. And he has the book on the oak with the big oak leaf in the front. That's another great book. And I'm showing you these books with the frontispiece in color so that you can remember them a little bit better. So now you decided that you want to do this, and how are you going to go about it? Well, you want inspiration and you want some basic knowledge. You don't want to be like me. God knows that I just planted and planted, and I didn't know what I was doing because I was working full time, but be that as it may, you can learn from nature and landscape sites. And there is two wonderful places here. One is the beautiful native plant garden around the Wichita Art Museum, and the other one is the Dick Arboretum. You can go out there, and they have those, the fall and the spring plant sales, and Brad Gore and Scott Vaught and Katie are very, very helpful and very knowledgeable about native plants. Look at pictures in books, magazines, and internet. Start small, start slowly. Ask a lot of questions. But when you go to a lot of the nurseries, God knows they're there to sell you plants. Don't waste your time if you think that the person doesn't know very much. Okay, and yes, buy from catalogs once you know what you're doing. But before you do a lot of buying and planting, consider your taste and your gardening style. What is the garden supposed to be for you? Consider your time, consider your finances. And if you want to plant outside, remember that horrible thing called the neighborhood association. People may not think it's beauty. People may report you to the HOA. And remember, make it legible. And what makes it legible sometimes is just a definition of what you're doing. It's maybe a little pathway or clipped edges at the sides or a little art or something. Now, how to bring it home? A few guidelines quickly. You want to be inspired by nature, not like nature. Group plants by common habitat. And by that is the needs of that plant. Do you want a woodland, a prairie, an estepe, some arid soil out there in New Mexico? But what you want to do is to capture the look of that plant community that you have chosen for your garden. And there is a little bit of nature, there's a little bit of art, there's a little bit of science. But remember, this is your garden. Enjoy making it, enjoy keeping it up. And if you like it, it's fantastic. That's all that counts. But some structure is needed. And remember, each garden can look completely different. But be creative. Just like you dress as you dress because of your personality, if you're a woman or even a man, yes. You wear your hair a certain way because of your personality. The same thing with your garden. The design tips to remember are planting design, random fashion, patterns can be repeated across the whole planting area. Why? Because your eye sees a pattern. We are intellectual human beings. We recognize patterns. We like patterns. It makes us feel safe. The plants that we choose should be real nature if you're going to do a naturalistic type garden. And there's always the question, should you plant cultivars, nativars, or should you go completely puristic? It's up to you. I told you the wild ones are the ones that are really into this. So get on them if you are into this. All plants chosen should become a community. How to get the look? Whether you have $100 or $1 million, use natural materials, native boulders, local stone or gravel, and gravel gardens are natural gardens, and they are really hot stuff. Look into gravel gardens. Use recycled wood. Human-made structure should be kind of less than the garden itself. Although when you see my garden, you will see that I don't follow that. I love art in the garden. I love water in the garden, whatever. When you get your softscape, the shrubs, get evergreen shrubs because you want to keep something going throughout the year. And then think about what you really want. You're going to be living with these things for a while. And always think about a place to sit. Think about water and think about art. And art doesn't have to be expensive. It can be an empty pot. And it's an art. When you buy plants, always remember the USDA plant hardiness zone. If you're buying flowering perennials, make it exuberant and put a lot of them. This could be a little garden. This is at the High Line in New York, and here it is. And look how close they are planting. If you buy ornamental and native grasses, you can use one as a specimen plant. But if you're planting to fill an area, plant a lot of them. Now, vines can make a place look a little wild. I have in one area of my garden on the fence, I have a lot of vines. However, I put this one in to remind me, there are a lot of thuggish vines. And when you buy a wisteria, make sure it's not the thuggish one that you're going to find all over the place. You can plant meadows in front of your house. This is a design by Michael King. And what does he have? He has asters and grasses, and they look beautiful. And then the fall comes and everything's brown. And this is, in the winter, and this is in the fall when the asters are in bloom. Buy plants that are native and they're wildlife supporting plants. Species that are native to your region if you can, because these provide food and nesting materials for the insects and the animals. And remember, the plants make the food with what I love is photosynthesis, but we have to get it into our bodies to live. And we have these intermediary animals, insects, that help us. If you want to read about that, read Ptolemy. Whatever you may choose not to go native, that's fine. And not going native is better. Going native just partially is better than not going native at all. Even Ptolemy admits to that. And what you should do is keep away from plant thugs that are invasive, that come from other areas, and we know them to be invasive, and keep away from polyploides. And somebody said to me the other day, what do you mean by that? If the best example to me is a lily with about 25 layers of petals, or those cornflowers with 250 little tiny petals in the center, because those do not provide a source of energy for those plants, because the insects get to the nectar by seeing nectar lines with their UV sight. We don't see what they see. And when you have all these polyploides, they can't see and they can't eat. In traditional landscapes, prairie plants can adapt to any traditional landscape that you have, modern, English, whatever. They will do fine, but follow some design principles. Plant in odd numbers if you can. Repeat specific plant grouping at intervals. Limit the number of species and include areas of calm where your eyes can rest. If you have all of this color, put some green in between so as to let your eyes rest. Choose plants with interest across seasons. Cool season grasses in the spring and bulbs And remember, many of these natives are prolific self-seeders. There is a great book called Plentiful. And what this PhD botanist is trying to tell us, and I believe it is, you can have a beautiful garden with very little money if you buy certain self-seeders, and in the spring, if you want to make some more of these, you can go out and get the early germination ones. And if not, you can go ahead and just get rid of them when they're tiny. But the thing that you need to know is it an aggressive spreader with rhizomes? Is it a thug, in other words? And some plants are too big for small gardens, some native plants, but you can cut growth back early. Most of the time, and I have a list, you can cut back to 1/2 or 2/3 height. By mid-June, you're going to delay flowering, but not for too long. And this is from Prairie Style Gardens, a book that is out of print now, and it's by Steiner. And all of these, you can go ahead and you can prune mid to late spring. Be sure it's before the second week in June. And they do very well, and they will not be flopping. Whether they need it or not, you can divide every 3 to 4 years. You will have more plants, you will prevent overcrowding, and mainly you will keep them healthier and stronger, and their blooming production will be better. And do this usually in the early spring because you need a full season to recover. Deep taproots like milkweeds and silphians and lead plants, it's not effective to divide them because you're not going to get these very deep taproots intact, and you're going to just kill them. Deadheading. I don't deadhead very much. I like plants that are clean, like Baptisias, for example. But if not, I can see why people go and deadhead. But don't just take the dead petals, go back down to a little bit lower to the first set of leaves, and they will rebloom. Now, not all of them will rebloom, and some of the ones that will rebloom will never have the same flush as the first time. But it does encourage budding and bud opening. And if you take off the dead heads, it decreases the undesirable seed production. But remember, leave some for the birds. Plants to avoid. Here's a list. Some may be thuggish. Somebody gave me some meadow garlic once, and I planted them because I thought they looked beautiful. That was 20 years ago. I still have some. So you don't want that. But some of these may be thuggish if you plant them in the perfect spot, they will. Now, this is the most important stuff I can tell you. And this is Rainier and West wonderful diagram. 3 layers. Think of your garden as having 3 layers. The structural layer, the seasonal theme layer, the ground cover layer. Structural layer, these are the big natives, the big grasses, the trees, the bushes. In the periphery, be sure you choose them correctly so that you don't have to move them. And then there's a seasonal theme layer. Plant for seasons of bloom. You want to have things blooming all the time. For example, I started with the hellebores, then I went to the daffodils and the tulips, and then my camesias came up. And then right now I have the big alliums, the ornamental alliums, and I have dames, rockets, and you can change the colors for every season. This is the layer that will tell you what season, what time of the blooming season you're in. But the most important layer for the soil is the ground cover layer. And structural layer, the seasonal design layer, and the matrix layer. This is the one that is going to decrease your weeding. I weed in the spring, and by the end of May, I will never weed again. That's it. Because if you really plant closely together, and if you plant up to about 13 inches, even 18 inches high, there will not be enough light for the weed to for the weeds to go ahead and grow. And the other thing is, you're not going to see them, so you're not going to worry about it. Depending on the size, your structural layer can be trees or bushes. They can be tall grasses. But if you have a little garden, you can get away with a little conifer. And the seasonal layers are the colors. For example, in the spring, you know that your salvias are coming up and are blooming in many places. But then you also know that in the late summer, probably late August to October, you can have liatris. And you can do, you know, by the colors. And then this is the matrix layer, the ground cover layer. And you can just have short greens, or you can have sedges, or you can have short grasses. The drop seed grasses are an excellent matrix layer. And the sedges. I've been planting sedges for the last 3 years. And I knew that sedges were becoming very important, because in the spring sale, guess what they had at the Dick Arboretum? They had wonderful sedges. And what are the sedges that you should think about? There are sedges that need moisture and sedges that can do very well. All sedges do pretty well in shade. Carex pennsylvanica, dry. Carex muhlenbergia, dry. Bromoides and albicans, pretty dry. So remember sedges and look them up and plant them closely together. Buy the plugs, don't buy the big, expensive plant size. Plants that you should know, ornamental grasses, and that name means nothing scientifically, but they all have narrow strap-like leaves, parallel veins, and seed heads. And we're not that interested in this, but we are interested in grasses, are in the shapes. Are they tufted? Are they mounded? Are they upright, or are they mixed? This is what you want to know. And when you are choosing them, choose for winter interest and leave them on there. Don't cut them down until probably the end of February. All heights are available, and be sure you know the height before you buy them. And I usually plant all of my grasses and all of my plants much closer together than they tell you to do. And then perennials do not die after setting seed. They are cool season grasses. They are very early in the spring. They start going and growing, and they go dormant when it gets a little bit hot, like 75 degrees or more. And the warm season grasses are slow to start, but they do beautifully as it gets hotter. And those are the ones with the beautiful inflorescences. Cool season grasses, here's a list. And you want to know whether one of your grasses are clump formers or runners, because runners and creepers are thuggish. And here is a clump former, and stolons are above with the rhizomes below the ground, but they spread all over. And here are the clump forming grasses. And here is a list of the rhizomes and the stolons. Remember, blue lime grass, somebody gave me, one of my master gardener's friend, and it took me a while to get rid of it because they go like crazy. Before you're in love with the grass, before you fall in love with it, be sure you know whether it's an annual or a perennial. And all the red ones are annuals in this weather. climate. Grows in tight clumps or spreads by runners. Is it a cool season or a warm season? Is it aggressive and is it hardy? Those are the things that you need to know. When you buy a grass, be sure they're turgid, standing upright. They're not limpy. Leaves should be flat and not rolled. Turn the pot out, unless it's a huge one, and see what they look like. If they have yellow and brown roots going encircling them, don't buy it unless they're on sale. Read the label for all the stuff that I just told you should know about, and talk to the nursery staff if they know what they're doing. Do not do much soil prep. They love to suffer. It's okay, but you do have to water them when you establish them, probably the second year. Otherwise, and get rid of the weeds at the site where you are. That's what you need to do. You have to get rid of the weeds, otherwise you will be suffering. And these are the spaces that they give you. The smaller grasses 12 to 30 inches, the taller grasses 4 to 5 feet. I don't. I do them, my smaller grasses very, very close together. Do not fertilize or water heavily because not good. What am I doing now? What I'm doing with my grasses is I leave them there, and in the fall, all I do is I kind of take all the real dead, ugly stuff off, but that's all I do. And as far as my leaves are concerned, I leave everything there the whole winter. I do, if anything looks rotten or anything looks bad, I will go ahead and just clean it so it looks nice. But I take away very little of my brown leaves. And here's what I do, just cut it off at the end. And dividing your grasses, when there's a hole in the center, you can divide them. And you can design with ornamental grasses, only grasses if you want, or mix them up. And use about 50% grasses, no more, to make it more natural. And be sure you are aware that you should have look at them from multiple points of view before you plant them. Plant in waves, plant for all seasons, and nowadays mix them with color, with the big natives. They're just perfect. And think about it before you plant them. You don't want to be moving them from one place to another. And remember, right plant for the right place. They come from poor soils. They like sunlight. The sedges, the Carex genus, be sure that you know that they do like damp, but now the Carex pennsylvanica loves it dry. And we use grasses because they soften the colors in between, because they give you texture and architectural elements, and because they ease the transition from one part of the garden to another. And I'm just going to quickly show you all of the cool season grasses with the verticality of the Carl Foster. This is my garden outside. And these are mine, not these. And this is a festuca, a blue fescue. They're short for small gardens. And this is the blue oat grass. If you don't like this, do not buy them, because they're going to look like that for a long time. The tufted hair grass are pretty good. And here's what they look like at various times. This is the fall. And warm season grasses, they work well in mixed plantings, and they really add a lot for the late season and winter interest. The Andropogon gerardii, the big blue stem, one of the big four, they're very, very elegant when they're like this, but they can really flop. Impressive and airy, but not elegant. So it all depends on what you want it to do for you. And they do have various different colors now. And of course, Blonde Ambition. And my favorite one. And it takes some shade. And that's what I like. It likes a little bit of shade. This is in my house, and this is in a park. And everybody knows about maiden grass. and the zebra grasses. I'm just showing you pictures. This is in my house. The maiden grass. And I've had this one for about 30 years, sitting right there in that corner. And it's a Pennisetum, a fountain grass, and I always put it, and this just comes up on its own. I don't do anything there. And this is a red one, and it's like an exclamation point, but they are not. They are beautiful, but treat them like an annual. And unless I love them. This is my house here and here, but I'll tell you, they are awful. They can spread like crazy. Indian grass is beautiful, not too tall, and the golden inflorescence is gorgeous. And this is dropseed grass. You can use it for a matrix, you see? And then you can put your perennials in between and you will never have to do any weeding. I don't like this, but I'm putting it for completeness. And there is a list of perennials. I will not go over the perennials, but everything is, and it has all the information. It has pictures. This is my garden. And it goes through all of the different types of rudbeckias that you can, that you want. And it tells you whether the water, the maintenance, the spread, the height, everything that you like. And there are about 20 plus of these. Are there any questions?
Okay, Laura, there are some questions, so give me one moment to access them in the chat. If you could only choose 3 to 5 natives to start out for an area, what 3 would you choose?
Okay, I would probably use two grasses and 3 perennials. I would use fountain grass, a Pennisetum, and I would use most likely an Indian grass, because I have fallen in love with an Indian grass. It's only about 3 feet tall, but it just, and it's vertical. Whereas the other one, the fountain grass, just kind of falls. So you can have 2 or 3 of those. And then I would probably definitely have cornflowers. Just put a whole bunch of them together in between the grasses. And I would like a yellow or 2 yellows tall. Probably let's see here. Probably this one, if you want a tall one, a Rudbeckia maxima is gorgeous, but it's a little thuggish, but it is beautiful and the animals just love it. And because of the butterflies, I would say that I would choose a milkweed. Now, I have a lot of Syriacas, but they are thuggish, thuggish, thuggish. But what I do is I let them come up wherever they feel like it, and then I just rip them off. But that's what I would do. It all depends on what you want. If you want it not for the insects, then I would say, this is a nice one. I had one that lasted 6 years and then it died. Rudbeckia subtomen, Henry Eilers. It's about 4 feet to 5 feet, and it produces the whole season. This would be a good one, but you want some yellow and a goldenrod and an aster.
Okay, thank you so much. Where do you get plant plugs?
Plant plugs, Prairie Moon, a catalog, Prairie Moon, and also at the Dick Arboretum, they have plugs. It just means that they're very tiny, you know? And they're like $2, and now $2 is cheap because everything is $3.98, you know? So, and those we're talking little, but plant plugs, you can buy a whole tray of plant plugs for your matrix layer.
Do you have a recommendation for the area beneath a maple tree?
Oh, hellebores. Hellebores will grow any place you want. And the beautiful thing about hellebores is that it's one of the first things that shows you a flower in February. And then in the summer, it has that big palmate leaf. And it almost looks like you're in a jungle. You look down and it just looks beautiful. And I don't have the fancy hellebores. I've had them for 25 years and it still seeds very nicely. So what I have done is throughout the last 25 years, I pull the little one that germinates well and I put it someplace else in the shade.
What do you recommend for living mulch?
Living mulch, anything you like that is not too tall, maybe 12, 13 inches. However, if grasses, those sedges, I have been using sedges, and that Carex pennsylvanica, particularly if you have a place that doesn't get a lot of light, that's wonderful. The sedges are very good. The prairie drop seed is living mulch. You can also use Festuca ovina, that let's see, blue fescue, you know. I'm trying that in one part of, and last year was okay. And so, but you can use a lot of other asters, for example, because when there's nothing in the garden, they're going to produce that white flower. My garden last year was like a snowstorm. I let him go crazy just to see what it would do. I experiment. But yeah, you can use grasses. You can use a mixture of grasses and short perennials.
Thank you, Laura. Now, this next one, I'm going to go ahead and respond to. Laura's presentation will actually be posted on the library's YouTube channel. So if you do want to watch it again, as someone asked about, it's going to be there. It typically takes about a week for them to edit it and actually get it posted. The other thing is that Laura graciously provided a PDF copy of her PowerPoint. And what's going to happen is I am going to actually send that out to everyone who registered for the program. And yes, Laura. Yes, please.
Can I say something? You know, there are about 50 more slides. I mean, there are about 20 plus perennials with all the information in that PDF.
That is absolutely wonderful. This presentation has been chock full of information and we're so grateful. Does anyone have any additional questions for Laura? There's nothing else in the chat, but if you want to type it real quick, I'm sure she would absolutely love to answer your questions. I will let you know, Laura, that there have been lots of awesome comments like, thank you so much. You're just wonderful and your knowledge and enthusiasm is amazing, and all sorts of really great comments.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Remember sedges. That's, you know, it's the new thing that is, you know, working. And remember Roy Diblick. I have heroes, and I guess that's my newest one. I'm 81 and I have heroes. But anyway, he really knows his plants, and it's in YouTube. And he has a whole 3 YouTube things on sedges, and he also has beautiful YouTube programs on native plants.
Thank you. That is such good information to have. We haven't had any additional questions presented in the chat. I will let everyone know that I have actually posted a link to the survey. We would love to get your responses to that. We want to Thank you so much for enjoying Laura's presentation with us. She did an absolutely phenomenal job, so informative, and we're so grateful. If you're interested in any upcoming library programs, please visit the library's website at wichitalibrary.org/events for a complete calendar. And again, just thank you for attending this evening's program and your support of the Wichita Public Library. That ends tonight's program. Thank you,
Thank you very
everyone.
much, everybody.
Thank you, Laura.